Let's wait for the stream to fire up all across the fruited plains of the internet. Then we can go ahead and get started. I know I'm about 60 seconds late over here, and we're still waiting on YouTube to get things going alive and well. And then we're going to get on with the broadcast. And it looks like we're just about there. So let's get started. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gruler. I am a criminal defense attorney here at the R&R Law Group in the always beautiful and sunny Scottsdale, Arizona, where my team and I, over the course of many years, have represented thousands of good people facing criminal charges. Throughout our time in practice, we have seen a lot of problems with our justice system. I'm talking about misconduct involving the police. We have prosecutors behaving poorly. We have judges not particularly interested in a little thing called justice. And it all starts with the politicians, the people at the top, the ones who write the rules and pass the laws that they expect you and me to follow, but sometimes have a little bit of difficulty doing so themselves. That's why we started this show called Watching the Watchers, so that together with your help, we can shine that big, beautiful spotlight of accountability and transparency back down upon our system with the hope of finding justice. And we're grateful that you are here and with us today because we've got a lot to get into. We've got Joe Biden, who just finished wrapping up his little pal talk with Vladimir Putin, the president over from Russia. So we're going to go through the aftermath of this meeting. This is something that, they were all sort of puffing up a little bit and then sort of downplaying a little bit, talking about, oh, this is going to be a contentious, high-stakes summit. And then suddenly, oh, well, we weren't really expecting anything to come out of that anyway, so who cares? So we're going to go through that. We've got some interesting imagery. The body language is something that everybody always takes a look at, and so we want to do that here as well. So we've got some stuff that we're going to get to, Biden versus Putin, here shortly. Then we're going to talk about this news story. You may have been seeing this on Twitter or being kicked around. It was on Fox News last night. Tucker Carlson was talking about this news story from Revolver.news. It's a very interesting website, very interesting article. As soon as you're done with this show, I would encourage you to go and check that out. Not right now, of course, you're busy, but after the show, go to Revolver.news, and they have a very, very long article that is breaking down sort of the allegation or the implication that maybe the FBI, maybe the government itself was more involved with January 6th, the Capitol Hill riots, than anybody is letting on. This is something that we all sort of kind of hinted at and sort of, tiptoed around a little bit because you want to ask yourself, it's weird. We have like 18 different intelligence community agencies in this country, and they all failed massively. And so we're going to talk about that as well. We've got some Capitol Hill updates over from Revolver.news. Revolver.news is the address there. Then we've got to check back in with our favorite sexual predators. We've got Harvey Weinstein is back in the news. He's being extradited from New York over to California. And of course, Ghislaine Maxwell is back in the news. She's got some complaints. Her attorney filed a motion last night, or a letter last night in federal court saying, we are sick and tired of these conditions in Ghislaine Maxwell's facility. And so we're going to go through that. Bobby Sternheim and then the government responded back to Ghislaine Maxwell. So we've got a lot to get into, as I mentioned. If you want to be a part of the show, I would love it if you did that by going over to watchingthewatchers.locals.com, which is our separate website. It's a sort of a community that we're building that is building our own little information superhighway, separate and apart from YouTube and these other big tech platforms. And so if you want to ask a question or leave a comment or lob a criticism, there's a live chat happening right there, right now at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. You can get some other good stuff over there, like a free copy of my book, a copy of the slides that we're about to go through. We've got some promo codes for some of my courses that are down here in the description link at gumroad.com/Robert Gruler. Got some links for other channels that we're working on, including our law firm, which is where we really make the magic happen, representing good people facing criminal charges. So check out all the links down below, and then let's go ahead and get into the business of the day. Pure business, according to the AP. They're saying that Biden and Putin, they kind of worked things out a little bit. Not a lot of fanfare, but not a lot of, takeaways. Nothing really kind of explosive happened, which is good. And nothing too shocking kind of happened either. So kind of a big, fat nothing burger. Well, so why are we talking about it? Because it's kind of a big deal. And on this channel, we've been hearing for a long time how big a problem the relationship is with Russia, right? We heard a lot of the criticism from the Democrats, from Biden, from basically everybody who was anti-Donald Trump at one point or the other. We even had, I remember Stephen Colbert, right, called Putin's something holster, something about genitals, something, not appropriate for late night TV. even if it is late night and awful TV. But they're still, shouldn't be saying stuff like that. But that was the implication, that Donald Trump and Putin, they were sort of, two peas in a pod singing Kumbaya around the campfire together. And Russia, lo and behold, everybody's been telling us, is this really horrendous geopolitical foe that the United States needs to take seriously. We know that the Democrats, their allegation was back during the 2016 election that some Russian, hacking took place or something that influenced the election. They were upset that some Russians, I guess, bought some Facebook ads somewhere. And so, a lot of people said, well, was that really consequential? Did it matter at all? Doesn't matter. The narrative had already been written. Russia's responsible for all of our ills. They're probably responsible for Donald Trump. Remember, Trump was supposed to be a Russian puppet, and the list goes on and on. So today was going to be the big day that Joe Biden was going to go over there and set the record straight. Tell these Russians, we are sick of your hacking. We are sick of you interfering with our elections. We're sick of all this other stuff. And so we want to see, did that happen? Because we heard a lot of that language back during the campaign. A lot of criticisms towards Donald Trump based on his posture with Russia. So let's get some backstory here. Then we're going to take a look at some of these images. First and foremost, I want to show you what's going on here. What was that transition? Let's change that, shall we? Turn that off. Let's do a mix. Let's see how that one works. Yeah, that's what we want right there. That's good. That's better. All right, we like that. So pure business at the summit. No hugs, no brickbats. This was written over here by Jonathan Lemire and Vladimir Ishankovov. So we've got maybe some people over there at the Russians, AP Bureau, whatever. President Joe Biden and Russian President Vladimir Putin concluded their summit on Wednesday with an agreement to return their nation's ambassadors to their posts in Washington and Moscow. Right? So remember sort of how this works. If you have a little bit of a quarrel between countries, everybody goes, oh, how dare you? We are taking our ambassadors home. And so they just pull their ambassadors out of the facilities there. They take them out of the ambassador post. They bring them home. And everybody goes, wow, Russia just recalled their ambassadors. The United States just recalled their ambassadors from Russia. Oh my gosh, are we on the brink of World War III? No, it happens all the time. Then what ends up happening is they say, well, we're going to have this really important summit. And what are we going to do? We're just going to send the ambassadors back. Oh, we're just going to send them back. So we're just bring them home, send them back, bring them home, send them back. That is foreign diplomacy, my friends. Well done. So they're going back now, and they're going to plan to begin work replacing the last remaining treaty between the two countries limiting nuclear weapons. So that's good. But the two leaders, they offered starkly different views on difficult simmering issues, including cyber and ransomware attacks originating from Russia. Oh, I forgot about the ransomware. Yeah, that was the other one. Apparently the Russians were responsible for the Colonial Pipeline hack as well. Putin insisted anew that his country has nothing to do with such attacks, despite U.S. intelligence indicating otherwise. Biden, meanwhile, said he had made clear to Putin that if Russia crossed certain red lines, including going after major American infrastructure, his administration would respond, quote, and the consequences of that would be devastating. Okay, so that's coming out of Joe Biden's mouth. So sounds kind of Trumpian, really. The consequences of that would be devastating. Didn't he say something about that to little rocket man Kim Jong-un over there? We're going to basically eliminate you or something like that. And everybody goes, oh my gosh, World War III. Everybody flipped out about it. Here is Joe Biden saying that he's going to, basically devastate Russia. And it's just sort of, mom, no hugs, no brickbats, pure business, according to the AP. Now, a lot of this is very interesting because one of the things that you typically see out of these little, charades is that you put both of the politicians up on the stage and you sort of watch how they interact with each other. So historically, we put Trump up there. I think Trump was in Helsinki or something with Putin last time. And, and so I think there was a basketball that was exchanged or something. And, everybody was very, very upset about that. They said that Donald Trump was a little bit too cordial. Right. To use Colbert's, holster analogy, that's sort of where that was going. Everybody said that he was in Putin's back pocket. And, so I can understand why perhaps the Biden administration may not want to actually, go through that again and do a press conference where you put both of these puppets up there on the stage and you just kind of watch how they interact with each other. So they didn't want to do that. I mean, to their credit, the whole thing's a joke, but, they sort of did not do that. They did not want to do the press conference. And, they might say because they didn't want to, lend any credibility to Putin. They didn't want to share the stage with an evil person like that. In reality, I think it's because, Putin sort of has a little bit of vigor to him, and Joe Biden, well, he has a little bit of vigor. We're going to see some vigor today, but we're going to see whether it's good vigor or bad vigor. There is good vigor, and there's not so good vigor. We're going to see which one we've got there. So I also want to make note of this. It's very easy for one politician to start running their mouth when there's nobody else on the stage to stop them from running their mouths. So that's the other point of putting them both up on a stage, is that one of them can say, what? I didn't say that at all. Because the whole theory here is you kind of cram them all into a room. So I'm going to show you the picture here in a second, but let's do it right now. Let's take a quick look at this picture. So, oh no, I didn't get it perfect. So here is the close-up of the two guys in the room. Now, on an expanded view, you'll see that sort of to Biden's right, you've got Anthony Blinken over here. And then on Putin's left, you've got somebody sitting to his left. So, it's four people in a room, then they break out. They're supposed to have this talk, stop hacking our stuff, stop interfering in our elections, blah, 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 right? And then they will come out now, and they're supposed to, after that sort of private, cordial, candid, off-the-record conversation, come out and give a press conference and say, hey, this is what we talked about. We were meeting behind closed doors. We wanted to make sure that we could be candid with each other, so there was sort of a safe space for us to talk and that the media wouldn't be there. But then after that conversation's over, they're supposed to go in front of the press and actually tell the press about what they had or what the conversations were about. And then if there is an issue, if, let's say, Biden comes out and says, I warned Russia that if they interfere again, that the consequences would be disastrous, then Putin can say, actually, that never came up. I understand he's concerned about that, but I expressed to the president, Russia does not believe we're responsible for this. And we actually believe that many of the U.S. cybersecurity hacks are emanating out of the United States, which is what he actually said. And so as we're going to see as we go into the story today. But the point is, we didn't have that opportunity. We couldn't put them both up there and have them compare and contrast their statements. So there's no verification of this. So then Putin just takes the stage. He does his own press conference, and he talks about how amazing he is and how great Russia is. And then he says a bunch of stuff that who knows whether it happened or not. And then Biden does the same thing. He does his own press conference. He runs his mouth, and there's no ability to verify what happened behind closed doors because nobody was back there. So it's very convenient, right? It's very convenient for these bureaucrats to do this and sort of, get a lot of press about it. Hey, we're working through our issues. Meanwhile, nothing happens. All we're doing is just sort of sending our ambassadors back to where they were. That's a good thing, though, because that means that they're back there. So the next time we get mad, we can pull them back again. We can take them back home. Send them there. Pull them back, and around we go. That is our government in action. Let's take a look at this picture. So this was the handshake heard around the world. Everybody's talking about this handshake. So, this is like a Rorschach test. It kind of depends what side you're on, how you sort of frame this out. It looks like we have a nice, strong handshake there. I mean, I will grant you that. We're going to zoom in, take a closer look at the handshake here in a minute. But you'll notice, if you go on Twitter and you go in the lefty Twitterverse, you're going to see that a lot of people are very happy with Joe Biden and how he approached this performance. We don't have the video here, but they're going to say that Putin, wouldn't look him in the eyes, right? So you're going to hear a lot of that talk. If you go to the right side of Twitter sphere, you're going to say that, well, Putin looks like he's just, kind of laughing his ass off here. Just kind of like, are you kidding me? Who am I shaking hands with right here? And then we've got, this sort of plastered on, smile for the camera's face over here. So, it's always fun to make fun of these types of people in these little things because apparently a lot of people, think that matters. Let's take a look here. We already saw this picture. So here they are seated. There's an image going around that apparently Joe Biden had some flashcards here. There's a lot of sort of Twitter commentary about flashcards. We have over here was the actual meeting, right? So we've got these two, people sitting across this aisle here. Who knows if anything meaningful took place. Here's a closer shot of that handshake. And I gotta tell you this, Joe Biden here does look like he's squeezing pretty hard on that hand. Well, I can see a little bit of a crease of Putin's skin right here, and it's just sort of bunching up around the edges. So he's gripping hard there. So we'll say that's good vigor from Joe Biden. We've got good vigor and bad vigor, and so that's good energy. America. All right, so Joe Biden's shaking hands. Now, the big question that comes out of all of this, of course, if you're talking about American interest. And if you're saying, hey, we go through a lot of this stuff with the intent of having a positive result. Otherwise, it's just kind of masturbatory. You know what I'm saying? We want to see some action. We want to see problem presented, a dialectic engaged in, and then a solution proposed and acted upon. And my question always, anytime the government does anything, is, are we thinking that way? Are we thinking about solutions? Or are we maybe just making people feel good and trying to talk about doing the right thing and sort of, focus on these broad, very indefinable concepts like justice or like, social justice or environmental justice. And we're going to address the root causes of the immigration problem. Well, what does that mean? I don't know. Fly down to Guatemala and tell them don't come? I guess that's something. But the point here is, are we actually seeing incremental progress? Are we moving towards something that is beneficial? Let's see what we've got here out of this summit. So the question is from the AP, will Putin change his behavior? Biden was asked at a post-summit news conference. He said, quote, I said, what will change their behavior is if the rest of the world reacts in a way that diminishes their standing in the world. Biden said, I'm not confident of anything. I'm just stating a fact. We're going to take a look at this clip here in a minute because that got a little bit bad vigor. Now, both leaders have stirred escalating tension since Biden took office, suggested that while an enormous chasm between the two nations remains, the talks were constructive. Putin said there was, quote, no hostility during the 3 hours of talks, a session that wrapped up more quickly than expected. Putin held forth for nearly an hour before international reporters, right? So they finished that little talk that we just kind of went through here, this little thing, right? 3 hours, bunch of, shuffling papers around. Then we've got this. Putin goes out. He goes in front of people for an hour. International reporters. He shows defiance at queries about Biden, pressing him on human rights. He also expressed respect for Biden as an experienced political leader. And we saw that historically. I mean, we saw that, I think, even before this summit, what Russia has been doing, and I think China has been doing it as well, sort of scrambling jets. I've got a story in here that I think earlier this morning, the Russian military was sort of, sending some ships around the Hawaii area, causing the U.S. to scramble some, F-35s or whatever they're flying. And it's all part of this game. Everybody's moving their pieces around a little bit. So now Putin is doing that in front of the media. Russia noted that Biden repeated wise advice his mother gave him and spoke about his family, messaging that Putin said might not have been entirely relevant to their summit. So you see what he's doing there? Right? He talks about this a lot. Putin's very good at this. So is China. And we're going to see what they're doing here. But basically, sort of Putin is doing that that nice insult. He says, well, while Joe Biden's a wise man, he was telling me about his mother and he spoke about his family. Wasn't really related to international diplomacy or anything that Russia cares about, but that's good for Joe. At least he's telling us about that. And he says it demonstrated his moral values. So that's how he's talking. And then he says, he's been a very, well, what do you think about him? Well, he's certainly been a politician for a long time. I'll give you that. It's like when you're on a debate stage and you say, can you say something nice about your opponent? And you say, yeah, I mean, he's like the best communist I've ever seen in the world. He's great. Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about somebody who wants to sort of, eliminate all of your rights and freedoms and liberties, he's excellent at that. He's really good. One of the best. Nobody better than that. So Putin's doing that same type of thing here with Joe Biden, and nobody knows any better. Though he raised doubt about the U.S.-Russia relationship, he said it could soon return to a measure of equilibrium. Putin said that Biden is someone he can work with. He said the meeting was actually very efficient. It was substantive. It was specific. It was aimed at achieving results. One of them was pushing back the frontiers of trust. Sounds pretty nice. President said that there was an agreement between the leaders to return their ambassadors to their respective postings, which is just excellent. So pack up your bags, boys. You're going back. Both countries had pulled back their top envoys as relations chilled. So Russia's ambassador to the U.S., Anatoly Antonov, was recalled from Washington about 3 months after Biden called Putin a killer. Okay, so this is the language that now we're sort of concerned about a little bit. He called Putin a killer at one point, and Russia was so mad about it that they said, hey, we're taking our ambassador home now. How do you think about that? So now U.S. ambassador to Russia, John Sullivan, he left Moscow 2 months ago. So Russia pulled theirs first, it sounds like. So Biden starts it. He calls it a killer, Putin a killer. Moscow takes their ball home first. Then the U.S. turns around and takes their ball home first. And then Russia suggested he return to Washington. Putin said the ambassadors were expected to return their posts in the coming days. So that's good news. The meeting in a booked-line room had a somewhat awkward beginning. Both men appeared to avoid looking directly at each other during a brief and chaotic photo opportunity before a scrum of jostling reporters. Now, this came up. Biden nodded when a reporter asked if Putin could be trusted. Uh-oh, that's weird, because that doesn't really jive with this killer concept. So if Putin's a killer, how do you trust the guy? So a reporter asks him if he could be trusted. Biden nods, but the White House quickly sent out a tweet insisting that the president was, quote, very clearly not responding to any one question, but nodding in acknowledgement to the press generally. So when you see stuff like that, there's a word for that. It's called cope, right? Like coping. You see, you can sort of like make that a noun. Like I see that as cope, right? This is something that, people on the internet say, and I happen to be on the internet, so I say it. This is very clearly cope, right? Biden says, reporter, hey, Mr. Biden, do you trust Putin? He goes, yeah. White House, their Twitter team is on high alert. They're just, crap, boom, right? Fire that out, because they got to be on high alert, red alert, not because of anything, that Russia's doing, but because Joe Biden is out there speaking now. So let's take a look now at, we talked about some good vigor, the handshake, and now let's talk about, not so good vigor here from Joe Biden. Now, the New York Post is reporting this, says that Biden blows up at a news conference after the Putin meeting. This was published today by Steve Nelson, Bruce Golding, on the defensive and appearing on edge after ceding public relations advantage to Russian Putin at their historic summit. I don't know what was historic about it, but Biden lashed out at the American press at the end of a short 33-minute briefing. So he tried to wrap up his Q&A after fielding questions from just 6 journalists. So a very big, important event, something that the media has been saying is historic. We take 6 questions from 6 journalists, okay? During an appearance lasted 30 minutes, about half the time that Putin spent during his own news conference. They were in Geneva, Switzerland. And we're going to hear from Biden, but let's just read through the transcript first and foremost. He says, what I said was, and let's get this straight, I said what will change their behavior is if the rest of the world reacted to them and they diminish their standing in the world, he said angrily. I'm not confident of anything. I'm just stating facts. Biden erupted again when Collins followed up by noting how Putin had denied any involvement in cyber attacks against the U.S. and downplayed Russia's human rights violations. Then asked Biden how their meeting would be considered constructive. Biden says, if you don't understand that, you're in the wrong business. Okay. So we're going to watch that clip here in a second. Now, before taking any questions, Biden acknowledged that his staff had told him ahead of time which reporters would get a crack. He said, as usual, folks, they gave me a list of people I'm going to call on. Why is that, right? It's because they have it all prepped out for him. Speaking to reporters before Air Force One a few minutes later, Biden apologized for having been short with Collins, right? So he's apologizing back to CNN. Now, this was posted over here by Curtis Hauk. Says, why are you so confident Putin will change his behavior, Mr. President? I'm not confident I'm going to change behavior. What the hell? What the hell do you do all the time? Why am I so confident? Here's Joe Biden.
Are you so confident he'll change his behavior, Mr. President?
Yeah, I'm not confident in changing behavior. What the hell? What do you do all the time? So when did I say I was confident?
You said in the next 6 months you'll be able to determine.
What I said was, let's get it straight. I said what will change their behavior is if the rest of the world reacts to them and it diminishes their standing in the world. I'm not confident of anything. I'm just stating the fact.
But given his past behavior has not changed, and in that press conference after sitting down with you for several hours, he denied any involvement in cyber attacks. He downplayed human rights abuses. He even refused to say Alexei Navalny's name. So how does that account to a constructive meeting as President Putin?
If you don't understand that, you're in the wrong business.
Is the summit with
Yikes. So, that's bad. That's bad vigor there from Joe Biden. He's not, that's not his shtick, right? The anger with the press thing, that's a Trump shtick. Joe Biden is that confused old man that everybody just goes, oh, it's just Joe. He just doesn't know what he's doing anymore. So we're just going to let him just kind of, walk around. When you have that sort of outburst, it kind of reminds you of somebody maybe having, we'll just leave it at that. So Joe Biden, doesn't look particularly good there, humbly speaking. But the bigger point on this whole thing is he didn't answer the question, which happened to be a pretty damn good question, kind of the only good question that we've heard recently from any journalist anywhere. It happened to come from CNN. Hey, you came out here and said blah, 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 all that garbage. But what about the idea that when we ask Putin some questions, he basically is denying everything. He's saying, nope, it's all the U.S. It's all your fault. Biden just gets mad about it because she has a great point. What's he going to say to that? Well, what? You're right. I said a bunch of garbage before the election, and now I have to eat that because I'm not acting on what I said about what I spoke about previously. I was making a bunch of claims about Putin, and now when it's time to put my money where my mouth is, I kind of fold, don't I? So that's why he's angry, and it makes sense. He should be angry because it's a great question. Now, let's carry on. He says also during the news conference, Biden mischaracterized the death of Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick. Remember him? We talked a lot about this case. He clashed with supporters back during the January 6 riots. And when asked about to comment on that, Putin was likening federal prosecution to scores of rioters, to his own crackdown. Biden called it a ridiculous comparison, right? So we've seen this happen previously. We saw this happen with Antony Blinken and the Chinese delegation. Remember, they came, I think that was over somewhere in near Hawaii, that side of the world. And they came, and Blinken comes out there and he says, hey, China, we're very mad at you. We don't like what you're doing with the Uyghurs. We don't like what you're doing with censorship. We don't like what you're doing with all of these things in the world, and so on and so forth. And the Chinese consulate just turned around and he said, excuse me? What did you just say to me? You're saying that we've got issues here in our country? How about you slave-owning Americans that have BLM and racial protests burning down half your cities? Maybe you should think about yourselves before you start criticizing us, right? And so we've seen this happen. Now, Putin is doing the same thing. He's saying, if you're going to be criticizing us about, federal prosecution of rioters, or if you're going to be, mad at us about Alexei Navalny sort of arresting our political prosecutions, or you're going to come criticize Russia for anything like that, we're just going to do exactly what China did. We're going to turn it right back around on you and cram it down your throats. So how about you deal with your humanitarian problems before you come into our house? And right, it's a pretty good point. I think it's a pretty good point. It's one thing for literally criminals to break through a cordon and go to the Capitol, kill a police officer, and be held accountable than it is for people objecting and marching on the Capitol, saying, you're not allowing me to speak freely. You're not allowing me to do A, B, C, or D. So when I said it was a good point, I wasn't sort of endorsing Putin's ideology here. I'm saying what he's doing is a smart negotiation strategy, right? He's saying, don't come into our house and throw stones because you're living in a glass house yourself, right? Not a good idea. So it's sort of this moral superiority thing that we see coming from the Democrats a lot, right? That, they're going to come down there and wag their fingers down our noses, talk about how awful we are, and they're going to go around to the rest of the world and do the same thing to them. Well, many Americans here are going to just accept that. Just say, yeah, I guess I am a racist. I guess I am somebody who's just an awful person. And I'll just go ahead and accept your pejorative framing of me as an individual, which, these other countries just aren't going to do, right? And there's a huge portion of Americans, myself included, you as well. That's why you're on this show watching this channel, that we're just not going to accept that framing, right? We just say, nope, if you want to live your life thinking that everything's a racist, oppressive nation, you're welcome to do that, but we're not going to live that way. And neither are these other countries. China's not going to stand for it. Russia's not going to stand for it. The CRT people, the people who are, trying to engage in political prosecutions that want to use this stuff to their political advantage, they may be able to get away with that here, but these other countries are not going to allow it to happen, as we are seeing. So when Putin then makes that comparison, now Biden comes out, and rightfully so, right? They're not the same thing. He says it's not the same thing to compare both. Biden also said he told Putin that certain critical infrastructure should be off limits to attack, period, by cyber and other means, talking about critical infrastructure and other things. He pointed out to him, we have significant cyber capability, and he says he knows it. He doesn't know exactly what it is, but it's significant. If in fact they violate the basic norms, we will respond. Cyber, he knows, in a cyber way, whatever that means. So, the language is kind of escalating a little bit, right? He's talking about devastating consequences and, we're going to respond and all of that. But then the big thing that stuck out here is that he is saying that Trump supporters, I believe, murdered a police officer in the Capitol, which when I listened to this, I was thinking, but that didn't happen, though. I mean, I remember that you put that in the impeachment articles against former President Donald Trump. I remember that everybody in the media was screaming about this. You guys had a lot of Democrats who were really milking his death for their own political gain. I thought it was reprehensible and sort of a disservice to him and his family and his memory, but they did it anyways because it served them ideologically speaking. And now Biden, of course, because he doesn't know, he doesn't know much about other than what he's sort of being told. He's just sort of parrots whatever, the last hoax was. He was talking about the Charlottesville hoax for a long time, the Fine People hoax, all of these sort of things that are just not accurate. He just keeps spouting off because he can't really remember, I think, anything differently. Here is Joe Biden now talking about Trump supporters, murdering a police officer, which of course didn't happen. Here he is.
Mr. President, when President Putin was questioned today about human rights, he said the reason why he's cracking down on opposition leaders is because he doesn't want something like January 6th to happen in Russia. And he also said that he doesn't want to see groups formed like Black Lives Matter. What's your response to that, please?
My response is kind of what I communicated, but I think that's a ridiculous comparison. It's one thing for literally criminals to break through cordon, go into the Capitol, kill a police officer.
Wrong.
And be held unaccountable.
Wrong.
And it is for people objecting and marching on the Capitol and saying, you are not allowing me to speak freely. You are not allowing me to do A, B, C, or D. And so they're very different criteria.
Mr. President.
So not a bad answer, right? I mean, that was a fairly good answer. I think that what's happening in Russia is not quite the same as what's happening with BLM, and especially if you sort of, I think, segment BLM into different categories. Let's be generous here and look at it in a light most favorable to BLM. Let's say that we did separate them into different buckets. You have the people who are okay torching down used car lots and Wendy's, and then you have the people who want some justice reform. And I think that might be reasonable, right? We sort of separate them out. And I might disagree with how they want justice reform. I might disagree with all 7 of their statements that are on their website, which are all politically based, not justice reform based. I think there's only one statement of their 7 of their BLM demands that actually has anything to do with justice reform. But my point is really the same, right? Political organizations are kind of not the same thing at what Russia's government is doing, taking Alexei Navalny and some other people who would, in a democratic country be considered legitimate opposition and sort of rounding them up and throwing them in, horrendous prison conditions. So Biden's right. It's not quite the same thing, but he's also wrong that the Trump people killed a police officer. Okay, we know one officer, if I recall correctly, died from suicide. We also know Sicknick died of natural causes. Took like 3 months to get that report finally. They milked that one to death until that was no longer possible for them to do, and the actual news came out. And then the other people who died, Ashley Babbitt was shot and killed by a police officer. Still don't know who did that one. And we've also got other people who died essentially from natural causes or stress-related injuries based on their involvement there, right? Hearts gave out, or they had, complications as a result of the physical activity. So just wrong on that, just absolutely wrong. Can grant him that. Now, that being said, he didn't look particularly, vigorous up there. So maybe he was saving that for that blowout with the CNN reporter. I mentioned earlier at the start of the show that Russia was kind of, poking Biden, poking U.S. defense officials before this all started. The U.S. Navy, we see this was published earlier today, published 9 hours ago as of this morning, that the Navy conducts massive drills in the Pacific right before the Biden-Putin meeting. Okay, we've been seeing this. Russian Navy, they've been conducting exercises 300 to 500 miles west of Hawaii, prompting the U.S. on Sunday to scramble F-22s, 3 of them. F-35s. I think the F-35, right? Isn't that program that we spent like $1 trillion at, and it doesn't even have an airplane yet? CBS News, citing U.S. defense officials, reported on Tuesday, Russian bombers never entered the air defense zone. Report said Russian officials called its exercise the largest in the Pacific since the Cold War. Do you think it's any coincidence that they're doing it right now? U.S. Pacific Fleet Defense Department did not immediately respond to hours after the email inquiry. The exercises come as the president and Putin plan to meet on Wednesday. Russian Defense Ministry said that the drills involved up to 20 surface combatants, submarines, and support vessels. Russian news agencies reporting this. List goes on. It was happening outside of Honolulu. The paper said a Russian surveillance ship last month delayed a U.S. missile defense off of Kauai. Paper said the ship was loitering in international waters for several days. So the Chinese are doing this. We talked about this here on the channel, right? There's the tongue-scraped depression down there over, I think, near the Bahamas, where they do the underwater sub-testing, the Navy Area 51, as they call it. And the Chinese have these souped-up fishing vessels that are filled with all sorts of, surveillance equipment on there, just floating around up there. So we're seeing what the world thinks of the posture here of the United States, and you can be the judge of what you think of it. So let's take a look at what Joel Pollack over at Breitbart is saying. He sums this up quite nicely. He says that Joe Biden got nothing in Geneva and Vladimir Putin got everything. He said Biden gave Putin almost everything he could have wanted there at their Geneva summit. Says he elevated Putin above other leaders, including American allies. Failed to force any real concessions on Russian policy. He says the degree to which the summit was a disaster became evident when Putin emerged from his press conference alone with the forum all to himself. He got to have an hour to just go out there and clear the record in front of everybody. Biden was not there to challenge him on anything, which way he just let him do whatever he wanted. So he's been running his mouth saying he's going to go, be tough guy with Putin, and then didn't even stand on the stage next to him. Biden team, says Joel, did not want to appear with Putin at a joint press conference after the meeting, both because Biden would look frail next to Putin and because the media dogma that President Trump had somehow done something terrible by behaving cordially when appearing alongside Putin in Helsinki, Finland in 2018, right? So Trump took the stage, Biden didn't. Putin, when he was up there, he fielded softball questions from Russian news agencies, but he also welcomed hostile questions from the U.S. media. In fact, Putin, an enemy of press freedom, was more polite than Biden would be, right? Because we didn't see an outburst from Putin over there. And he took far tougher questions, according to Joel. The opportunity to defend his own position and to attack the United States without fear of contradiction by Biden, who should have been standing there, was a massive gift to the Russian president. He used the old Soviet tactic of pointing to American problems as a way of deflecting from questions about human rights and political opposition, right? Which we already talked about this. The Chinese do this. Everybody else does it. They're using, many Americans are using this sort of moral superiority as a sword, right? To go into other countries or to go into other, classrooms and say, you're a bad person unless you believe like us. And so when we go and try to do that, they just say, well, we're just going to use your own standards against you. And it's a good argument. So maybe the better argument should be maybe we shouldn't be sort of, preening moral authoritarians all the time and talk about things that maybe don't involve sort of touchy-feely minutia. Just one man's thought on that. He did so without contradiction. He cited Black Lives Matter movements as an example of human rights abuses, right? He said he knew no American journalist would object, because how can they object? They can't. They go, oh yeah, we've been saying that for a long time. It's a good point there, Putin. You're right. We also hate our country. So here it is. We'll finish this up. We've got reporters press the two leaders separately to reveal what commitments, if any, Putin had made to change Russia's behavior, but there weren't any. Putin walks away from Geneva with no significant response to cyber attacks. Okay, no, nothing. With the Nord Stream pipeline, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which Trump had opposed. Okay, so now Russians they're gonna build their own pipeline. So in the United States, we don't get a pipeline. Keystone, doesn't happen here because we have environmental problems. We want to save the planet. Donald Trump, though, opposed the Russians doing the same thing. They want this Nord Stream 2 pipeline to be built. He said, no, we're not gonna back that, because what that's going to do is it's the environment, whatever. What that's going to do is give Russia a very nice pipeline of oil that they're going to need, which is going to make them less dependent on external resources, which makes them a little bit more independent themselves and makes them a little bit more of a threat to the rest of the world, because they don't have to engage with the rest of the world to get a very vital, necessary resource. So Trump thinks about it strategically. I really don't know what Biden is doing, sort of, backtracking on that. So now they get to build a pipeline in the United States. We don't get one. It's kind of a twofer double loss for the United States vis-a-vis the Russians here, because now you've got, well, if you're a liberal, now you've got a pipeline that's being built that in your philosophy is going to wreck the planet, but you also have a less stable geopolitical environment, because now Russia can isolate itself a little bit more, knowing that one of its vital resources is being provided for through the pipeline that Biden just approved. What else? We have no real pushback against his aggression in the Ukraine. Notably, Biden met with Putin before meeting with the Ukrainian president. The meeting is to be announced. The response of the American media echoed Biden's posture of appeasement. CNN, which had raised the alarm when Trump and Putin appeared to get along together, gushed about Biden's optimistic tone at the summit and how wonderful it was that Biden and Putin seemed to be having a friendly conversation. During the 2020 campaign, Biden claimed that Trump was unwilling to take on Putin. Putin leaves Geneva a winner. Joe Biden got nothing. All right, so that is over from Breitbart. Thought it was a very nice summation of kind of what I am sort of feeling right now, so I wanted to share that with you. Let's take some questions over from watchingthewatchers.locals.com. All right, we've got first in the house. We've got Speech Unleashed. Says, I think Putin would have been all for going against Biden on the same stage, and Biden knew it. That's why they didn't want him on the stage together. I agree with you, right? It's sort of probably the right move, candidly. I would have liked to have seen them up there together because Joe Biden has been talking a big game. I mean, all the Democrats have been talking a big game for a long time. 2016, Russian interference. We saw there was hints of that this last election, and this was the moment to call them out. Many people on the left basically say that the Russians helped Donald Trump steal the election from Hillary Clinton, that the catastrophe of the Trump presidency for the last 4 years was all a direct result, literally, there are people who think this, of Russian interference with the election. This was the moment. This was the big day for Joe Biden to go in there and get some repercussions for what they did to this country. And he didn't do that. Didn't even take the stage. Oh, we talked for a few hours behind closed doors, and then I'm going to scream at a reporter for asking me a legitimate question about whether he held him accountable or not, as he said he was going to do. All right. We've got Want to Know says, Biden did say that criminals broke into the Capitol and killed a police officer, and BLM is about free speech. And that's why Putin is putting down his insurgents to the world press. I'm surprised he didn't blame Trump, too. I was going to take this image. There's an image of Joe Biden looking at a cue card, right? His flashcards. And there's a whole statement on one of the videos. I think OAN did a zoom in, sort of telescopic photo zoom in lens. And the whole thing's about just ripping on Trump. I'm like, you can't remember that there, Joe? All right. We got Sharon says, I'm sorry, but I don't believe a syllable of this AP story crediting Biden with taking a firm stance against Putin. But on the other hand, if Biden is in China's pocket and Russia and China are rivals, makes me wonder, cui bono, who benefits? It's a good question. Yeah, it's a good question. Look, if I had to guess, I would say that China is really the master puppeteer of a lot of things happening around the world right now. If I had to guess. We've got Leafy Bug is in the house. He says, when are we going to concede that what is being done to Biden is elder abuse? How can the U.S. lecture Russia about its human rights abuses when it's forcing a senile old man to be president? It's a good question. When Joe Biden was going after that CNN reporter, I was like, whoa, okay, we're going to get a little bit of intensity out of him. Let's see what he's got to say. Then he sort of murkied around in front of everybody, and then he opened his mouth, and then it's like a mumbled jarble of marbles were falling out of his mouth. And everybody's sitting there just waiting for him to go, oh, what's he going to say? What's going to happen next? And he was able to muster up enough of a sentence or two. Then he passed it back off to the reporter, and she asks a follow-up question that's really substantive, that actually matters. And he just kind of says, if you don't know better, you're in the wrong industry. Yeah, which is really insulting. I mean, I think that might be a little bit sexist. I don't know what ethnicity that woman might have been, but she might want to look into that. Sounds like some white supremacy going on there. We got E. Dantes in the house, says, these press people, they don't know what they're talking about. They're all in the wrong business. These lying, dog-faced pony soldiers. President Joe Biden. Yeah, I mean, I have no love for the press. Maybe Joe's on to something. We've got Jeremy. What's up, Jeremy? Haven't seen you in a bit. He says, there is no contest for professionalism and presence and the ability to speak in with international leaders when comparing the 45th and the 46th presidents. Ooh, yeah. It's a good one, Jeremy. I like that. We've got Sharon Quidney says, the only difference between the January 6th political prisoners and Putin's rivals is in the living conditions afforded the prisoners. Another good comment. Thank you, Sharon. And we've got Nadarb over here says, I don't know if you saw this, but I shared a video to the community page where a cop pushes a man off the top of a tall staircase during the Capitol chaos, and that man later died. But all we are hearing is everyone died naturally. What else don't we know? Wow. So we're talking about this next, Nadarb. We are going deep into Capitol Hill. I'm not sure how deep it is, but I'm going to tell you where to go deep. That is the Revolver.news story. Yeah, I did not see this video. I've not seen that, but I didn't realize that person had actually died. Is that? Oh, Miss Faith put the video. Here's the video. I don't think there's any audio. Oh my goodness. Did that guy die? Wow, okay. So, yeah, he kind of did get pushed off there. I have not seen that. No, I did not realize that happened. And I didn't know that guy might have died. Wow, interesting. The point is, yeah, there's a lot we don't know about what happened at the Capitol, and we're going to take a look. Next up, we've got No Doubt is in the house. Says the Russian pipeline transports oil from Russia to Europe. Provides them a market for their oil. Oh, okay, so it's the opposite way. So thank you for correcting me on that. So it's going to go from Russia out, while destabilizing oil producers in Russia. So strategically, that is poor if conflict between Europe and Russia erupts, as they will be dependent on Russia for their part of their oil supply. Okay, so cool. So that's awesome, which is why I love this show. So I got corrected on that. So I was saying that maybe, the Russians are going to be importing oil. No, it sounds like they're going to export oil, which might mean that the basis for Trump opposing the original pipeline would have been more something like maybe the U.S. wants to be the supplier of the oil to the Russians, and they don't want Europe to be sort of held hostage to their oil supply from the Russians. That gives the Russians a little bit more leverage over Europe than the United States, which may want to be the sole provider of that vital resource. So excellent. That was awesome. Thank you, No Doubt. Very much appreciate that. And our last one in the house, we've got Osak71 says, hey, Rob, big fan. So I'm very disappointed with Mr. Biden right now, not for the current reasons or issues, but more on a personal level. The reason is when Biden claimed he is now the president, I made a choice to start learning the Chinese language. Now Mr. Biden has placed us in another bad place with the Russians. So now I don't know what language I should learn first. Any ideas would be helpful. It's a good question. I would probably pick the language. I'm not real familiar with either of them, but I would pick the language that has more pronouns, because you're going to want one that gives you a lot of pronoun versatility, because we have, I think, like 100 of them now. I don't really know what the total limit is, but in the United States, we speak English here. We have of course, he, her, they, them, theirs, all those. But I think we also have like Z's and Zers, and those are complicated. And there's also, I think, some like animal pronouns, like cat-ish pronouns, and it's very complicated. I really don't know the extent of where this is going to go. So if you're going to be picking a language, I would pick one that has a lot of expandability for all the various pronouns that we're going to need to be using in modern America for the foreseeable future. So good luck, Osak. Let me know what you decide. Maybe I'll learn that one myself. All right, so thank you for all of those questions. We are going to move on now to our next segment of the show. All of those questions came over from watchingthewatchers.locals.com. All right, so in our next segment, we're going back into January 6th. January 6th, the day of the Capitol Hill riots. We've spent a lot of time talking about these cases. We were broadcasting on that very day, doing a minute-by-minute analysis of what was happening. And we've been following the cases along throughout the entirety of the prosecution. We've talked about the government sort of asking for continuances, not agreeing to let certain people out of custody. We've talked about the inability to sort of deal with a big bubble of cases that are working their way through 300, 400, 500 new cases. Seemed to be something that broke the prosecution's office out there at the U.S. Attorney's Office. And so a lot of criticisms about how this has all been unfolding in front of us. But I've always had a lot of questions about how did this all happen in the first place? And I've been pretty consistent here on this channel asking for investigations. I want to know who is responsible from top to bottom, because in this country, we have a lot of people who are responsible for making sure that we're safe. We've got, I think, 18 different intelligence community agencies that we're going to be looking at. And we've got the DC Metro Police, the Capitol Hill Police, and the list goes on. National Guard was there, and there was a catastrophic failure. And so in my mind, yes, it is easy for me, somebody who has a lot of criticisms for the government in general, recognizing that it's a massive, ineffective bureaucracy that doesn't do much. It's easy for me to say, well, I guess they all just failed, right? They all just failed. Every single one of them, from the FBI all the way down through the Sergeant of Arms for both houses. We have every single entity just failed. And the center of our government in the United States was commandeered by, 300 or 400 or 1,000, however many people, doesn't matter. The point is it happened. How did that happen if we spend billions of dollars every year to prop up every one of these agencies? They're supposed to be intelligent. They're supposed to be encouraging and protecting the country, in particular, the Capitol building. And they failed dramatically. So what happened then? I want to know who's responsible for it, right? How do we have this domino effect, this sequence of catastrophic failures to such a degree that something like this can happen. Seems pretty amazing to me. So I've always had questions about this. Did the government, were they sort of involved, or did somebody sort of, have a stand down order? And I know it's conspiratorial, but it is something that sort of, it might have a little bit of smoke there, right? Maybe there are some people, I've known this in my experience as a criminal defense lawyer, who are a part of law enforcement, who kind of bend the rules a little bit, right? They sort of maneuver things around the edges. And so I want to share this story with you from Revolver, where they're talking about another situation and comparing it to this case where something like that may have happened, where the FBI, where law enforcement, where anybody who is investigating a lot of these militia groups, the people that the media and that the government is claiming is responsible for the January 6th riots, what if the government was sort of, kind of in on it? What if they were acting as informants or co-conspirators, and they were encouraging some of this activity to take place? Wouldn't that be a big stinking problem? It certainly would. Now, Revolver has done a lot of the heavy lifting on this. I want to show you their article. We are not going to be able to go through this in its entirety. It is a long one, and they're going to go through a lot of it in very, very intensive depth. I would encourage you to go read this. Okay, it's at Revolver.news. It's right on their homepage, so go check it out. This was published June 14th. Tucker talked about it yesterday. Unindicted co-conspirators in the 1-6 cases raised disturbing questions of federal foreknowledge, right? And we're going to go through this, as topically as we can. And it starts off, it says, of all the questions asked, of all the words spoken, of all the ink spilled, and the so-called Capitol siege, none hold the key to the entire event quite like what Senator Amy Klobuchar asked of Christopher Wray. Okay, Amy Klobuchar is this woman. We've seen her before. She was a big, highly involved in the last election. I think she was even running for the last election in the primaries, got kind of far, in fact. And she's been involved, right? She's a Democrat from Minnesota. She asked the Trump-appointed FBI director, did the federal government infiltrate any of the so-called militia organizations claimed to be responsible for planning and executing the siege? Okay, and it's a pretty important question, because we've seen historically, and we've covered it on this channel, and we're going to talk about it very briefly here, another case very similar to this, where there was a group of people who were going to allegedly go and commit a kidnapping of the Michigan governor, Gretchen Whitmer, Big Gretch Rona. And what happened was, turns out there were like, of the 14 people who were all involved in that little scheme, like 5 of them were FBI informants. They were part of the government. And some of these people were kind of really encouraging the criminality. And what Revolver is saying, the big takeaway from this entire article, is that the government is not being honest about who those people are. They're putting them in reports, not as informants, not as undercover agents, not as CIs, confidential informants. They're calling them individuals, just other people that are making it into these reports, that are part of these investigations, that are unindicted co-conspirators, but are in fact more than that. And so a lot of the response to this article has been like, it's not possible for the government to charge an FBI informant because they're not actually co-conspirators. So we're kind of missing the mark here a little bit. So we've got some work to do on this article to sort of dissect it a little bit, because there's a lot of stuff that's being said about it that I think is sort of missing the mark. Let's start off by going back to the beginning. Here is Amy Klobuchar now. This is back taking place on March 2nd. She's asking FBI Director Christopher Wray about whether or not he knows that there was anything taking place, whether there were any undercover informants from the government that had infiltrated the militias. But I actually oversold that a little bit. She's not asking that. She's sort of opining. She's saying, like, wouldn't it be nice if we did have informants in there? And then Christopher Wray goes, gosh, it would be. And you're going to hear him, right? He's an aw shucks, just golly gee shucks guy. He says, you're darn tootin'. What? Listen to him. You're going to hear him say this. Our FBI director, you're darn tootin'. We're going to work hard out there, Amy, and solve American problems. So we've got this guy here. Nobody's actually answering the question. She says it would be nice if we had undercover informants in there. Not, do we? And if so, how many? And if so, why did they fail to notify law enforcement about this pending attack? And why didn't you do anything to stop it, right? No follow-ups like that. It's just 2 people who are on the same side who want to make a political statement commiserating with one another. Here they are.
And they show up, we now know, in this complaint with encrypted two-way Chinese radios in military gear, there must be moments where you think, if we would have known, if we could have infiltrated this group or found out what they were doing. And that, do you have those moments?
Absolutely. I will tell you, Senator, and this is something I feel passionately about, that anytime there's an attack, our standard at the FBI is we aim to bat 1,000, right? And we aim to thwart every attack that's out there. So anytime there's an attack, especially one that's this horrific, that strikes right at the heart of our system of government, right at the time of transfer of power is being discussed, you can be darn tootin' that we are focused very, very hard on how can we get better sources, better information, better analysis, so that we can make sure that something like what happened on January.
All right, so doesn't happen again. Got it, right? So he doesn't really answer anything there. You know, she kind of allows him to, just like Revolver says, weasel his way out of answering the question directly. Klobuchar does him the courtesy of not asking him anything. Klobuchar instead asks the director if he wishes he had infiltrated, right? Rather than did you? Revolver.news, they say they want to address it directly. And so they've got these questions that we're going to ask. And I want to run through these briefly. In the year leading up to 1/6 and during 1/6 itself, to what extent were the three primary militia groups, and recall these names, we talked about a lot of these here, Oath Keepers, Proud Boys, and the 3%ers. Okay, we're going to revisit those. They're saying that the FBI, the DOJ, the Pentagon, Network News, they've labeled the most responsible. How much of those agencies were infiltrated by the federal government and or had informants within there? Okay, how many? I would love to know that. We're going to break that down. Number two, exactly how many federal undercover agents or confidential informants were present at the Capitol or in the Capitol during the infamous siege, and what roles did they play? Merely passive informants, or were they active instigators? There are some very interesting YouTube videos floating around making an argument that it is the latter. Finally, of all the unindicted co-conspirators referenced in the documents, how many worked as confidential informants or as an undercover operative for the federal government, FBI, Army counterintelligence, etc.? So very good questions. Very good questions. And if you read this, Revolver News actually says that, there's a lot more coming. So buckle up. My question, my initial thought is maybe they filed FOIA requests asking for some of that information. And I'm not sure if they would have gotten anything back since they would have been undercover, confidential, but maybe they have, maybe they've seen what they've asked for, what they've gotten, and they can identify and sort of piece together what is missing from what should be there, and they can make some deductions about that. We don't know. But some very good questions. And one of the big responses has been from, law Twitter and from the lawyers is, hey, you're kind of mixing things up. Everybody's getting all this confused. So we've got Brad Heath. He says, guys, agents and informants basically can't be co-conspirators. He says this has been the law for a while, right? Agents and informers, they cannot be conspirators, because conspirators means that you're sort of intending to go, break the law. Like you can't, it's got to be more than just sort of talk. You got to have a common scheme or plan. You got to do an act in furtherance of it. And so if you are an agent, then obviously you're not a part of that common scheme or plan, and you're not really doing anything to further it, because you should be, if you're an informer or an agent, preventing the harm from happening. So Andy McCarthy also says, not sure I understand the story, but by definition, a government informant cannot be an unindicted co-conspirator, right? Conspiracy is an agreement to commit a crime. If you are there on behalf of police to inform, then you haven't agreed. Okay. Now, so the distinction here becomes, are they being properly labeled as government informants, or are these people just being labeled individuals, right? That they're not indicting. Unindicted co-conspirators. These could be individuals. This could be a wife. This could be a friend. This could be somebody who ratted out on somebody. But it's kind of what we're talking about, but also kind of not, because we're talking about maybe the fact that the government is not labeling certain of these informants or these undercover people as government agents, as government informants. They're just calling them individuals, which is why they have to label them as unindicted co-conspirators. So there's a lot of mess going on here. Let's see if we can tease out what's happening. Now, on Twitter, I want to show you some more cope. Okay, so Twitter did not like what Tucker Carlson did last night on his show. And if you missed that, I'd encourage you to go watch it. There's like a 10-minute clip that's floating around on Twitter, because he gets hot about this, as he should. It's a big issue. Now, Tucker Carlson on Twitter, the way that Twitter works, if you're not a person who's on there, is on the from time to time you'll get on the sidebar, there'll be this trending box, and the trending box is sort of supposed to be, what's trending on Twitter, but it's not being run by an algorithm. Okay, these are certain people who see what's going on, and they write these little things that they post up there. So it's sort of an explanation. And the way that this works, practically speaking, it's sort of the worst part of Twitter, but they make these little propaganda statements that come out. So when something's trending, then they really go in and they have to cope. They have to sort of do what they can to justify what's happening. So this was trending today, and they said Tucker Carlson, right? A lot of people were talking about this clip, 69,000 tweets. So they want to clarify for you, in case you're too dumb to know, they say that federal law does not permit cooperating witnesses or informants to be charged with conspiracy. Okay. So first of all, that's hilarious, right? Because there is never anything in the law that is sort of absolute. So they say federal law does not permit it cooperating witnesses or informants to be charged with conspiracy. Like that's a blanket statement, right? Now you can find a lawyer who will tell you that, but they're being a little bit intellectually dishonest, because what all lawyers know the first day of law school, when you go to law school, you learn what is the answer to any legal question ever presented, ever. It's the right answer, right? Any question, 2 words, it depends. And you argue both sides of that, because that's kind of how the law works. That's why you are never done being a lawyer, right? You're always practicing, because there's always arguments to be made. So you can say federal law does not permit cooperating witnesses or informants to be charged with conspiracy. Pretty sure I could find you probably 25 cases that make an argument to the contrary in some way, shape, or form. Don't know if it's going to be a successful argument, but it's probably very possible, right? I've never personally made that argument, but I would guess that you could. And so it's kind of hilarious as a lawyer to see some, Twitter intern, moron out there typing up a response because they didn't like Tucker's response. They didn't like that he was trending, so they got to respond back. They also say that the federal law does not allow it, despite a baseless suggestion by Carlson that some co-conspirators were not charged because they were undercover FBI agents. So it's like, they have to just chime in on that conversation. It's like when you're at a dinner table and you got a friend there and you're having a conversation, and the person across the table says, actually, that's not how that works. I've been to Peru. Okay. The boats there, they're not that big. You're going, we're not even talking to you. I don't care about Peru or the boats, or what are you talking about? Leave us alone. So it's kind of like that. Twitter just wants to inject itself when nobody cares. So the question that I've always had here, of course, and I mentioned this at the start of this segment, is where has our intelligence agency been? Where are they? Okay, this is the list of them. There are a lot of them. Let's take a look at them. We've got the Air Force. So this is something that you can gather over from the ODNI, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. It's a clearinghouse for all of the 18 different agencies that manage intelligence throughout this country. You're going to see a lot of them on here. We got the Air Force Intelligence, Army, CIA, Coast Guard. We got the Defense Intelligence Agency. The Department of Energy has its own energy. Of course, we have DHS, Department of Homeland Security. State has theirs. Treasury has theirs for the money. We got the DEA. We've got the FBI. We got the Marine Corps. We have the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, which is doing things in geospatial intelligence. We've got National Reconnaissance Office. We've got the National Security Agency. We've got the Navy Intelligence, and now newly added the Space Force. These are all being held and managed by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Okay, and they're supposed to investigate all sorts of crimes, all sorts of criminality. They should be, I would imagine, one of the top priorities would be to protect the U.S. government, places like the Capitol building and all the people that inhabit that building, because they're kind of important to the U.S. government. Now, this is not the extent of this. We have the National Guard. We have the Capitol Hill Police. We have the Sergeant at Arms for both the Senate and the House, who are responsible for their little forces. They've got the Metro Police, and the list goes on. And everybody failed from top to bottom. They all just dropped the ball. So, how does that happen? Yesterday on the show, we tried to talk about how to prioritize and break down what some of the harm looks like. And I want to just recover this quickly. If you recall, there was a report that came out yesterday, 32 pages from the Biden administration, that was detailing how they're going to be handling domestic extremism in the United States, whatever that happens to be. And they lumped them into all these different categories. Yesterday, we put together this chart, and we were trying to identify which groups are the biggest problems. Okay, because we know what the current administration is saying. They're telling us it's sort of these people at the top, the white supremacists, the QAnoners, and the militias. Okay, we've seen this a lot. Then we're also hearing that these are the big groups, right? These are the big groups that are responsible for all the madness and chaos and destruction, which I personally have not seen much of that outside the allegations that maybe this was something responsible for the January 6th stuff. Then we also have the government is sort of saying that in addition to wanting to put this, really hard law enforcement emphasis on the groups, that this is difficult to solve because a lot of this stuff is done by individuals as well. And so this is what's going to justify this massive national dragnet that's going to gobble up more information, capture more innocent people. But these are all based on things that are individual, like race-based shootings, violence against women, violence against the LGBTQ. We've had some shootings take place. We've had, the list goes on. And so what I would like to do, as somebody who is a person interested in solutions, is have our government sort of prioritize these for us. Tell us which ones are the biggest, which one of these groups results in the most loss of life. Who's responsible for the most deaths on the planet? Which one is it, or in this country? And once we know that number, then maybe we can identify how much monetary loss they are causing, how much actual property destruction. And then in addition to that, we can talk about economic loss, right? What are they preventing you from doing? When Chaz took over that little, zip code of land there, what did that do to the economy there for those, for that city, for those local business owners and things like that? Then we want to take a look at group size. You can easily take a look at all of the other demographics. We talked about this yesterday. Things like income, religion, ethnicity, right? The list goes on because we want to solve the problem. Right now, they're telling us it's white supremacists, QAnoners, and the militias. But do we know that? They tell us that, but we don't really know, do we? So now we're starting to see that there are some clarity about the militia groups, right? We've seen this from the Revolver story where they're telling us, how about we take a look at the Oath Keepers specifically? And we've covered this. I know they're blaming the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys and the 3 percenters. Those are the big three that they labeled for January 6th. So now let's take a look at those and let's compare them to maybe some groups that arguably are on the left. Okay, so I want to show you, I did some research on this afternoon. Let's take the top 3 that they are claiming are the right-wing organizations. Then we've got, let's pick some other groups that may be on the left, right? I don't know where Antifa would actually put themselves, but I'm going to put them on the left. We've got BLM, which some people might argue is sort of, middle. So we'll kind of keep them in the middle. We've got Antifa, we've got ALF, which is the Animal Liberation Front, and ELF, which is the Environmental Liberation Front. And then we have the Black Bloc. Okay, you can go on counterextremism.com and look up extreme left-wing groups. You'll find many more. So the question then is, now we've got sort of this category that they're saying are the right-wingers. We've got this category that maybe are the left-wingers. And we can just do a simple analysis. How many people did each group kill? How much money and damage did each group cause? How much loss of economic activity did each group result in? How big is each group? How many confidential informants do you have in those groups? And then really you could come to some sort of a total equation on what the harm is, right? You could say, okay, we had 100 people were killed here. It cost $1 million over here. And the economic loss was maybe $2 million in lost productivity. The group is 5,000 people big. We have 500, or 50 confidential informants in there. And so you can just come up with an equation. We add all of these up, that plus that plus that, maybe multiply that times the size, divide that by the total number of confidential informants in there, and we get a harm ratio, whatever that looks like. Okay, you come up with some sort of way to quantify this. And then we start to solve the problems, whatever that looks like, right? And this is for the government and the FBI and all these people to figure out. But I don't buy the premise yet that the groups that they're saying are responsible for it are in fact responsible for it, because we know the government is filled with liars. So now that we have that data fleshed out, we have some information that is on a chart that we can sort of plot. I want to show you how I'm sort of thinking about this. This is the distribution curve, right? So we're all familiar with sort of a bell curve. But my question for our government, my question before they start passing all of these domestic extremist laws, before they start trying to, take more stuff away from us, I want them to quantify, how does the amount of harm distribute across the nation? So let me show you what I mean by this. We all know what a bell curve looks like. And if the total amount of harm is what, let's say, Biden and Merrick Garland say, what does that relationship look like, right? All of the harm is coming from the right. Okay, so this is what the distribution of the curve would look like. It's all happening here. We don't see anything from BLM. We saw yesterday, we read through that 32-page report, nothing from BLM, no harm over here, all empty. Nothing from Antifa. So what they are telling us is that all of the harm is coming from the right. Militias, Oath Keepers, Proud Boys, so on, MAGA Trump supporters. So my question is that accurate? Okay. Or does it look, something like maybe like this, like a regular bell curve? Okay, well, maybe most of the violence isn't actually coming from the left. Maybe most of the violence isn't actually coming from the right. Maybe most of these shootings and deaths and all the loss, all the harm, it's kind of coming from people who maybe are just not apolitical. They're just a little bit crazy, right? They're just kind of, not really political one way or the other. We've got some people who just want to go shoot up a building or shoot up something because they're just kind of mentally deranged, right? That's going to happen in a country of 370 million people. You're going to have a lot of harm that just comes from the center that's not connected politically one way at all, right? It may not even be domestic terrorism or domestic extremism by the standard definition. It's just a crazy person. Okay, we're going to have those. And they are thankfully very few and far between. And the likelihood of you being injured or killed by one of those things is so infinitesimally small, it's almost not even worth considering. But we're turning it into something where it looks like what we're trying to do is make stuff that maybe in center distribution, we're trying to sort of cram this all one direction. Right, we're sort of saying, oh, that's all this. Everything that happens is going this way because we want the administration, the people who want to harm the right, want to make it look like this. When in reality, in my perspective, from what we've been covering on this channel, it more looks like this. Okay, the burning buildings, the torching of used car lots, Wendy's being burnt down. I mean, everything outside of the Capitol building that we've been following on this channel has largely been this. Okay, Antifa's been setting up their own stinking cities within cities in different parts of the country. So is it this, or is it something that maybe actually looks like this, right? Maybe the harm is something like that. Maybe the political violence is more evenly distributed. But if this is the case, folks, we are not talking about any enforcement over here. We're only talking about this: militias, oath keepers, right wingers. We're not talking about Antifa. They don't come up at all in any of this stuff, or BLM, or ALF, or ELF, or the Black Bloc. None of it, because we're only focused on a political group. They want to skewer one political ideology. So I would like to know, where do we stand? Because this does not feel exactly right. And if they're going to be making that claim, I would like to see some evidence to back that up outside of January 6th. And I haven't seen it thus far. So the story continues. If it turns out the federal government did in fact have undercover agents or confidential informants embedded within the so-called militia groups, indicted for conspiring to obstruct the Senate certification, the implications would be nothing short of seismic, especially if such agents informants enjoyed extremely senior level positions within such groups. Okay, we're going to go through this. Oh my goodness, this is explosive. Let me show you this. We're going to get there in a second. We got a couple more slides first. Let's say this. Let's say that the FBI had agents or informants that were in extremely senior level positions. This posits that allegation. And one of the key consensus points among the FBI, DOJ, and the regime media is that while 1/6 is primarily the fault of Trump supporting QAnon-infused domestic terrorists, it is secondarily the fault of so-called intelligence failures. Okay, so we've got sort of two groups: all the Trump maniacs and all of the intelligence failures, which were a lot of them. Now, what are they talking about? Let's take a look. Klobuchar's own question at the March 2 FBI hearing reinforces this, quote, intelligence failure narrative. She's not alone. A 5-month bipartisan Senate investigation recently arrived at the very same intelligence failure narrative to explain the breach. This block quote says, a bipartisan Senate investigation of January 6 found the security and intelligence failures at every level of the government that led to the breach of the Capitol by a pro-Trump mob. 95-page report, product of a roughly 5-month joint probe, found significant breakdowns ranging from federal intelligence agencies failing to warn of a potential for violence to a lack of planning and preparation by the U.S. Capitol Police and law enforcement leadership. There was no overall operational or staffing plan for that day, a total failure of leadership, according to the committees. Okay, which is, we've already seen this story before, right? Sort of saw that on 9/11, right? The last time that they wanted to go after the terrorists, those were foreign terrorists. Now it's sort of domestic terror. Oh, the government is incompetent. We throw literally hundreds of billions of dollars to prevent this stuff. They couldn't even communicate. It's shocking at how incompetent our government is. I mean, it's really surprising. I've always known that and suspected it, but it is actually quite something. Now, they go back and they show us, they walk us through this this story. We've talked about the story here, the Whitmer kidnapping plot, right? And this is where we're going to see some evidence that maybe they're classifying their undercover people a little bit differently. They say, and I want to just flesh this out again. They go into extreme depth on this. I'm like picking out a couple paragraphs of a massive document. So bear that in mind. They say, of course, we could point to countless examples of undercover agents being actively involved in domestic terror plots. But for the purposes of argument we're making here, we only have to go back a few months, back to prior to 1/6, the so-called Whitmer kidnapping plot. And the allegation here is that the FBI was involved or somebody was involved. Indeed, what if you were told that scarcely 3 months before the 1/6 Capitol siege, the FBI actually arrested 14 people for planning to kidnap Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer? We talked about this. They also wanted to overthrow the state government, and that the alleged conspiracy to overthrow the state government involves storming the state capitol. Sounds pretty familiar, doesn't it? And what if we told you that of the 14 individuals who allegedly plotted the, quote, kidnapping and overthrow of the government, that at least 5 were undercover agents and federal informants? Okay, so almost a third, over a third, at least 5, at least a third, were actually undercover agents and federal informants. And if that's not enough, this article says, many of the individuals allegedly involved in this plot appear to belong to, quote, the 3 Percenters, one of the same very militia groups now blamed for the storming of January 6th. Continues, and as the cherry on top, what if we also told you that the director of the Detroit FBI field office, who oversaw the infiltration of the Michigan plot, was subsequently granted a highly coincidental promotion to the D.C. office, where he is now FBI lead agent for all of the January 6 cases? That sounds pretty interesting. Sounds kind of coincidental, doesn't it? Maybe that's all it is. Maybe it's just a coincidence. I don't know. Read the full article if you want to get more on that. But the point here we're going to get to is we're going to revisit that, and we're going to talk about that concept of at least 5 agents, maybe more, because of this misclassification problem. And if you recall, I mentioned previously the idea that maybe there are informants who are at senior levels of some of these organizations. I talked about this yesterday. Enrique Tarrio. Remember, this was the white supremacist who is not a white guy, who is leading a white supremacist organization as the president of some chapter. Well, what if that actually, I had questions about that yesterday. I was saying, how can you be a white supremacist without being white? It was not computing for me, but what do I know? Tarrio, according to this article, may have actually been in cahoots, or actually was confirmed to be in cahoots with the FBI. Let's take a read of this article. A full discussion of Tarrio is outside the scope of this piece, though, they say. But for now, we're going to simply note how remarkably convenient it is that the head of the Proud Boys, a known FBI informant, just happened to get arrested and banned from D.C. the day before the January 6th protest, in which the Proud Boys were involved. Did they pull him out? Set the whole thing up and pull him out? Article says, what better excuse for the leader to not be present on that fateful day, right? Big day. Why wasn't he there? Oh, he got arrested. Oh, that's why he's not there. No, that's pretty convenient, isn't it? Upon Tarrio's arrest on the 4th, the quote, the upper tier leadership of the MOSD Telegram channel was nuked, and a channel new MOSD took place. We now know that this top leadership Telegram group included unindicted co-conspirators UCC 1, Person 2, as well as Proud Boys North Carolina chapter lead Charles Donahoe. Okay, on January 4th, shortly after the Proud Boys chairman's arrest pursuant to a warrant was issued, Donahoe expressed concern that the encrypted communications that involved the Proud Boys chairman would be compromised. When law enforcement examined Proud Boys chairman's phone, Donahoe created a new channel on the app, took steps to destroy and nuke the earlier channel. The new channel included several additional members. Okay, now it's a possibility, isn't it? This is where defense attorneys live, in possibilities. And we like to play with these ideas. And let's take a look at how this wraps up. Now, what if this person, Steve Robeson, okay, and you're going to note here in quotes, it says, quote, an individual. Okay, so Steve Robeson is being categorized by the FBI as an individual. They're saying that him being outed as a deep undercover FBI mole just months ago In the Michigan plot, among other incidents, calls into question every other major unindicted co-conspirator in the case. So here's what happened. Let's see here. It says, indeed, in this case of Robeson, the FBI and the DOJ conspired to use this exact language trick to hide evidence of the secret FBI informants from the judge, defense counsel, and the public. So what does this mean? They're saying that when they were writing their reports against the Whitmer plotters, that they were calling people person 1, person 2, UCC 1, individuals. And they were saying for some time that the individuals were not confidential informants, right? They were unindicted co-conspirators. But what if, because you can't indict an informant, so they can't be labeled unindicted co-conspirators because it would be the wrong, like you cannot indict them. So they're sort of fighting over the language here. But the point is, what if in the FBI investigations, they were not properly labeling their undercover agents? They were calling them individuals. Later on, it comes out, oh, they were in fact undercover agents, undercover individuals. That makes it almost impossible for the defense to know anything about how to prepare the defense, because it's looking like all of this undercover confidential information, it's outside of our ability to review it. It's outside of discovery because it's confidential and undercover. Whew. Okay, so let's wrap this up. It says, in the end, we are left with burning questions that ought to entirely reshape the way the nation thinks and talks about the events. From now on, every politician commenter who cares about 1-6 has a duty to pressure FBI Director Wray to come clean. In the very beginning of the piece, we drew attention to Klobuchar asking Wray about whether there were anybody who infiltrated. Don't you ever kick yourself, she asked the director, for not having infiltrated these groups. Now, armed with the research in this article, any politician ought to kick themselves if they do not ask the following. How many of the unindicted co-conspirators in January 6 cases are now or have been undercover agents or confidential informants? Indeed, pulling on the thread of the developed world, they're saying this could be a potentially extraordinary scandal. They say, stay tuned. We are not done yet. All right, we're going to see. We're going to see if anything else comes of that. Let's take some questions over from watchingthewatchers.locals.com. Joe Snow is in the house, says, I'm hearing some of the January 6 prisoners who are being denied bond are showing up to court with black eyes. And the ones who have been formally charged are being charged with things like trespassing versus insurrection or terrorism. Have you heard anything like that? What's your opinion of judges who observe black eyes in people who've been held in solitary confinement and do nothing? So, you know, that's not something that I have heard, but it does not surprise me. I have heard, not specifically about the black eyes, but I've seen text messages sort of back and forth that are being posted on Twitter from people who are inside these facilities saying that they're being treated very, very poorly in subhuman conditions, which is not something that surprises me even a little bit. Okay, we're going to talk about in the next segment about Ghislaine Maxwell and some of the conditions that she's in. Here's what my experience has been with things like this. When prisoners complain, when defendants complain when they're in custody, it is, in my opinion, something that just gets totally thrown out, looked out the other way. What most people in positions of authority tend to believe is that everybody complains. All of the complaints are sort of unjustified. People are doing things to themselves, or they sort of take things one step further, which is, I think, how a lot of, unfortunately, people in America think about criminals to some degree, is that they're just criminals. Who cares, right? No, throw away the key. They did something wrong. They are subhuman, and they sort of get what they deserve. So I know the January 6 prisoners are getting abused. I have no doubt about that, because they are essentially, in many cases, folks, they are being politically prosecuted. Doesn't mean they didn't do anything wrong. Doesn't mean they shouldn't be, charged with a crime. But what we're seeing is not a regular criminal prosecution. We're seeing political prosecutions, and there is a big difference there. We have LT13 says, did you see the ever elusive pipe bomber on January 5th where the tape released was spliced together? So there are parts of the video missing. I did not see that one. The pipe bomber, right? The guy who put, I think, stuff over by the different Capitol buildings. They ever find that guy? I'm not sure. No, but I did not see the spliced together video. A lot of interesting videos out there for sure. Leafy Bug is in the house, says the January 6th incident was infiltrated by the feds, likely initiated by the feds. Look at how the FBI provoked and then entrapped those dumb guys to mouth off on the internet about what they were going to do with Gretchen. This is what they do. You have to be very naive to believe they knew nothing about January 6th in advance. I agree with you, Leafy. I agree with you, which is why I've been upset about this. All right. We've got Sharon says, easy answer to the question as to what group is the most dangerous. Number 1, Trump supporters. Number 2, libertarians. Yeah, I know. And 3, pro-life groups. And number 4, Second Amendment defenders. You got them, Sharon. I mean, that is a lethal combo. Wow, that is dangerous. Wow, it's pretty disastrous to be a libertarian, somebody who sort of adheres to the, non-aggression principle. Yeah, we're pretty dangerous, aren't we? We've got Nadarb out there says 161 days and still no ID on the supposed pipe bomber. That's nice. Yeah, so nothing on that, right? Which is just, excellent work there, intelligence community. All 18 of you agencies can't find somebody who was in and around the most protected geographic area, should be, in the world. It's pretty embarrassing. My thought is on this is like, what if we just didn't have those intelligence communities? Like, what if they didn't exist? Or let's say we just cut them in half. We just you all are terrible. We're going to pay you what we think you're worth. And as far as we know, all you're doing is just stealing all of our data and spying on all of us. And you're sort of just letting, basic things go wrong. Like, it's basic. Okay. Like if the CIA couldn't get their hands around, a Jack Bauer 24 situation to stop a Wuhan lab escape virus from, bursting out of the seams, and, Jack Bauer's racing in there and everybody's waiting in the last minute and the virus escapes. Darn it. Right. That's a tricky thing. The virus is complicated. But just making sure that a bunch of people don't cross a certain barrier and get into a building, it's like, law enforcement 101. Like, they can do this at concerts and schools and sporting events, and our entire interconnected intelligence community couldn't muster that feat. So if we just cut their budgets in half, like, would the Capitol building have been twice as bad? Would it have happened anyways? Ridiculous. Oh my gosh. All right, we've got E. Dantes says, please pronounce my name with the same inflection as Leafy Bug. We got, oh man, I can't do it. We got E. Dantes. We'll try that. I'll play with it, E. Dantes. We'll try it. That extremist group matrix you made is perfect. I've been thinking along these lines. Someone show me the evidence on which groups are posing what threat. I like the cut of your jib. Like you back there, E. Dantes. I'm going to have to work on that one. I appreciate that, right? It's like, hey, we structure our lives this way. If we have a to-do list, we put them in a to-do list. We say, that one's due this time. I need this much money for that. And so they just come out and say it's all white supremacy. And I'm looking around on the news and I don't see big organizations of white supremacists roving around the streets causing havoc and madness. But maybe I'm just missing something. I do have a condition, as you know. Farmer's Daughter 4 says the media belongs on that chart. Oh, you're right. You're right. Yeah, that's a good one. I like that. Well done. We've got Sharon Quinney says, you ask for evidence of preponderance of violence coming from the right. Sorry, evidence? What evidence? We don't need no stinking evidence. Thank you, Sharon. Be Brave says, our federal government is so far out of hand, I don't see how it can be fixed. That's a good point. Somebody was asking me about this on Twitter today, and I said pretty clearly there that the solution, if the government does not become dramatically more effective or reduce the burden on its current citizens, people are going to find alternative systems. And in my opinion, that's going to be in the network state on the back of cryptocurrencies in a decentralized, non-governmental system of governance. Decentralized governance. That's the answer. So, all right, we've got LT13 is here, says, I had a convo with my police officer friends and was saying how Signal is hackable. And he said he had just taken a class on it, and it isn't. Guess how they have the convos? Someone showed the convos. Yeah. So Signal, I've heard that about Signal, actually. I've heard that Signal sort of less secure than Telegram. I don't know. I think that it's probably a good idea to just presume anything that you type in anything digital is going to be monitored. All right, we've got No Doubt says, after much head scratching, I've decided that white supremacist and white privilege definitions are not what you would intuitively think, he says. They are really using the definitions of American supremacy and American privilege and replacing American with white. That way, they can hide the attack on the American principles behind evil-sounding terms. Ooh, wow, yeah. I like what you're saying there. Yeah, sort of. Rather than saying that the entire country is bad, it's a divide and conquer strategy is what it is, right? Rather than going at the whole and saying everything in America is bad, you just start sort of separating people. And we've talked about this, right? The idea that there are accelerationists who want to increase division and animosity amongst different demographics in this country in order to exacerbate, increase, and bring about a major revolutionary social change in the country, right? That's the solution. If there is systemic racism, you got to rebuild the system. You got to throw that out and build a new equitable system on top of it. But it's hard to attack an entire system. So now what do you need to do? Well, you got to just sort of start peeling the layers off, start attacking one demographic after another. And so you start dividing people. You say, nope, you're white, you're black, you're Hispanic, and there are big problems between all of you. And we're all standing here going, really? Are there? And they say, yes, there are. And we're going to educate you about this so that we can start, causing a lot of animosity there. Then if you can peel off, like the white folks, it's just a matter of time until there is another group that is oppressive, because this ideology cannot exist without an oppressor and a victim. Currently, it's the white people. Eventually, it's going to be somebody else, and it's just going to just sort of pass around. It'll be the rich people. It'll be the Jewish people. It'll be whatever. And around we go until they can just continue to decimate society, because this is where they get their value. These people have, very, very, very twisted hearts and minds and souls, and what they want to do is gobble up power at your expense, and they're working hard at it. We've got Jeremy Matrita over here, says, great show as always, my brother. I'm always listening, not always able to safely comment. As to the last topic, a great man used to say, wisdom guided by experience. Many stories have been coming out that are confirming many of our previous feelings we had about these events. It's right, Jeremy, and you've been here for the long haul, and we've been talking about these things, right? Just scratching our heads saying everything that we're hearing doesn't logically resonate, doesn't make sense. And we start asking questions, and people don't like that, right? We got demonetized in the middle of all this. We got demonetized for what we were talking about right after January 6th. It happened right in February. Okay, we were talking about all of these cases. YouTube said harmful, dangerous information, so you're demonetized now. And why is that? Okay, as I've said this before, other people may not have been able to sort of, carry on with a show like this. There are other YouTubers being demonetized means that's the end of the content, right? There's nothing else to talk about because they got to go, earn a living. Fortunately, I happen to work at a law firm, and we're doing the show anyways because I believe in it. But believe me, YouTube is doing what they can to sort of limit these conversations. Big tech is, big media is, and we're just going to keep on the train to truth, and we're just going to keep sticking to the tried and true principles that we know are right. Okay, freedom, the ability to live your life without an overly burdensome government. We want honesty, we want accountability, we want transparency, we want justice. All the things we talk about here every day, and the government has not been giving it to us. But we know the truth shall set you free, and it does come out eventually, and we're going to be continuing to cover it. So very good stuff over there, and I want to tell you about some very good stuff happening at our law firm, by the way. There's a phone number right there to call. We do some pretty good stuff over here at our firm. We help people with things like traffic tickets and felony charges and drug charges and DUI charges, and the list goes on and on. The phone number is right there, 480-787-0394. There's a QR code there as well, and we're very passionate about helping good people facing criminal charges find safety, clarity, and hope in their lives. And so if you know anybody, we'd be honored if you sent over a referral our way. And if you don't know anybody, that's okay, because you may not need actual criminal legal representation. In fact, I hope you don't, but you definitely need knowledge. That's right. Knowledge is very important. And I've got a place for you to get some of that right here. So law enforcement interaction training is now up and available. This is the program, my friends, that you need. This is something that it is better to have it and never need it than it is to need it and not have it. We talk about the 1, 2, 3 rule in there for dealing with law enforcement. So go check that out if you have not already. And if you've already gone through the course and you're watching the show, I would really appreciate a review over there at gumroad.com/Robert Gruler. All right. Thank you for all of that. And we're going to move on to the next segment. All right. Last segment of the day. Our favorite sex offenders are predators are back in the news. We're talking about the two big ones, of course, Harvey Weinstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. They're back in the news because Harvey Weinstein, he's already been sentenced to 23 years in prison, but he's going to go through another trial again. They are extraditing him from New York over to LA, and he's going to stand trial again for a number of other sex crimes. So let's take a look at what's going on here. Then we're going to get to Miss Maxwell. So Weinstein, now he's being sent over. He's a convicted rapist, former movie mogul. He's going to be sent over to California. A New York judge ruled on Tuesday that he's going to be extradited. He was convicted of third-degree rape in February 2020, sentenced to 23 years in prison. So he's currently at the Wendy Correctional Facility in Buffalo. He's been charged with 11 counts sexual assault in LA. So 5 women now accused of assaults in LA, Beverly Hills from 2004 to 2013. Okay, rape, forcible oral copulation, sexual battery by restraint, sexual penetration by force. His attorney said, "We're disappointed in this decision today." Just now, his attorney filed a writ of habeas corpus in the LA County Superior Court, asking the court to hold off on the extradition until he can receive the needed medical care here in New York. So you're going to see this kind of theme here, right? We've seen it with Ghislaine Maxwell. We've seen it with Harvey Weinstein, that they need, additional resources and things like that. So Weinstein now is going to be, on his way back. Let's finish this article. It says the writ says that his rights would be violated by extradition because he's got a degenerative eye condition that requires months of medical attention. We have Elizabeth Fegan and another attorney who is over in LA. She says, this is excellent news, so she's thrilled about it. Says he has used every excuse for a delay. She says, time's up. He's going to have to answer again for his horrific sexual abuse. Gloria Allred, lawyer representing 2 of the women, says she's very glad. I'm looking forward to seeing Weinstein finally appear in LA. One of the many women who have accused Weinstein of sexual assault, Louise Godbold, said in a statement that she is happy that 5 more women will have the chance to face their abuser. Sadly, the statute of limitations means that at least 100 more can only look on. So it's incumbent LA extradite. So he's going to be extradited. It sounds like he's entitled to a trial within 180 days, although it's unclear at this time when he will actually arrive in LA. So we'll see. Now, we talked about something like this. Remember in the Rittenhouse case, Kyle Rittenhouse was charged out of Kenosha, Wisconsin. He went across the border back to his home in Illinois, and they extradited him. And he had some pretty bad lawyers at that time, but they were going to be challenging the extradition, and they failed massively. And if you recall, what happened there is when we talk about extradition, it can be a little bit complicated because you're dealing with 2 different states and they've got their own rules and how they process things. And so you kind of have to be somebody who sinks some time in to understand what the relationship there is. But in Kyle's case, what happened was he went back over there to Illinois. They challenged extradition. The judge granted it, and they said that they were going to challenge the grant of the extradition. So they were going to appeal it. They wanted to keep Kyle in Illinois. And so John Pierce, the attorney there, said that, he went into court, we're going to fight this till the end of the earth. But Kyle was already on the truck going back to Kenosha. Okay, so I think it was like on a Friday. He on Twitter all weekend, we're raging, appeals. And Monday morning, Kyle's in Kenosha in front of a judge. So, that might happen here, right? We're talking about, they're going to appeal this. They're going to contest it, and blah, blah, blah. We'll see whether or not that actually happens. And sounds like, if I had to guess, are we going to have a Harvey Weinstein trial in the next 120 days? No, definitely not. I would guess that would be something that we see far down the road. We'll see, though. All right. Now let's talk about Ghislaine Maxwell, because this is where the good stuff is. Ghislaine Maxwell, now, this is her attorney. We've talked about their attorney a lot here. I want to show you what's going on. So this was filed on 6/15 late last night, 32 pages, looks like. We're not going to read all 32 pages, of course. This is from Bobby C. Sternheim, defense lawyer extraordinaire. I am so sort of impressed by this firm, or this woman or person. I don't know the gender, but here's what they're saying. Dear Judge Nathan, this letter is submitted in response to the government. Third-hand information presents a one-sided review. So let me frame this out a little bit before we start getting into the document. What's been happening here is Bobby Sternheim has been just peppering the government and the court with all sorts of information and requests. And we've talked about this on this channel here previously. Ghislaine Maxwell, the government, has told us that she's got 2.3 million pages of documents that she needs to go through. Okay, when we first came up with that number, I think Ma Fox was on the show, and he did an analysis for us, and he said that if you if you sort of add everything up, like all 2.3 million pages, it would stack up to like 900 feet high, which is like one of the taller skyscrapers in America. Okay, it's a lot of documents, a lot of material. And so in order for a defendant to be able to process all of that, they got to go through it, right? Every single document, every single sentence, period, hyphen, everything, so that you can prepare for your defense. And if the government's going to be disclosing 2.3 million pages, well, by God, you better believe that Bobby Sternheim is going to demand every scrape of leeway in order to process that amount of documentation. The judge is going to have to look at that and go, are you serious? 2.3 million pages? You can't like whittle that down a little bit? All right. So then the judge has to be accommodating to Ghislaine Maxwell, because there's basically an unreasonable accommodation that must be met based on what the government is providing. Okay, so based out of this sort of mess that's happening, Ghislaine Maxwell now, her attorneys are just fighting for every inch. We want everything. And every time that the guards do anything that's sort of encroaching on Ghislaine Maxwell's free space, they say that this is a violation of her due process rights. You don't want guards hanging over her while she's going through her formal documents, right? The guards are with the government. So we don't want them to see what she's doing to prepare for her defense. There's a major conflict there. So every time there's been any incident, Bobby Sternheim just fires off a letter and says, hey, the last time we talked about Ghislaine Maxwell, the allegation was that Bobby Sternheim brought something in with her and left it with Ghislaine Maxwell that she shouldn't have done. And then Bobby Sternheim fired that off and said, are you accusing me of committing a crime? How dare you? And now I want everything from you, person who's accusing me of that crime, which I think was the prison facilitator. So now sort of what's happening here is there are all these different procedural techniques and tactics that are being brought into this case. It's not even really about this allegation of sexual assault involving minors from 20 years ago. This is all about now due process problems, due process violations, because the guards are interfering with Maxwell's ability to prepare her own defense, which is a very fundamental philosophy, concept, and right in this country. So now what Bobby's doing is every month or so often, there's a periodical requirement that the government updates the court on the conditions of Ghislaine Maxwell, because if she can't sleep, she can't prepare for her defense. If she can't eat appropriately, if she doesn't have proper facilities, then she can't prepare. So when Ghislaine Maxwell then has a trial and loses her case, guess what? Appeals because of due process violations. Ghislaine Maxwell was not afforded the ability to prepare her defense. Of course she lost, based on the fact that the government didn't comply with standards of care that are appropriate. The penalty, they're going to argue down the line, this is coming 2 years from now, the penalty should be a dismissal of the charges. So we're going to see that. What they're doing right now is they're just laying it all out. They're sort of laying out the framework and they're just walking their way through it. And they're doing a pretty masterful job in one man's humble opinion. Let's take a look now at what's going on. So now this is Bobby Sternheim sending this letter over to the judge saying, hey, we're responding to the government's letter June 7th. We're updating the court about the conditions of Ghislaine's detention. This letter, like the one before, it contains second, third-hand information. It prevents a one-sided review, giving the court, the public a false impression that Miss Maxwell is detained under favorable and privileged conditions. So she's saying the government sent a letter on June 7th, and they're basically saying that she's living in a resort. It's not the case, Bobby says. Each time the defense feels compelled to respond to give the court and public a complete and accurate picture of the unacceptable conditions of her confinement. This is not the purpose that these updates were designed to serve. Okay. Accordingly, the defense requests that any further updates be limited to changed circumstances. Okay, so they don't like what the government is sort of surmising for the court. Counsel for Ms. Maxwell can personally attest to many problems that are not reported to the government, not conveyed to the court, not docketed for public review. The following is a sample of new and recurring problems. Let's see what's going on in here. We've got Ghislaine Maxwell says, last week, raw sewage permeated Ms. Maxwell's isolation cell, necessitating her removal to another cell. So sewage is coming up the toilets. We've got vermin droppings. They fell from air vents, so that's nice. Guards now prevent Miss Maxwell from removing legal documents from the video conferencing room for review during the lunch hour. So they're not letting her get her legal documents. See, due process problem. Obviously, you can't prepare for your case if you've got sewage coming out. You've got vermin droppings coming from the air vents. On Sunday, guards refused to allow Miss Maxwell to bring a notebook in to her scheduled in-person legal conference, disbelieving her assertion that it contained legal material. Okay, so she has a notebook. She says, no, these are my legal notes. And they say, no, we're not going to let you have that notebook in. We don't think there's legal material in there. She says, yes, there is. They say, that's too bad. You can't take it. So can she open them up and show them? No, she can't. So she just has to leave that out. Now she's going to say, I couldn't take notes during my very important legal preparation conference room meeting. And this is her attorney making these claims. Okay, so this is a little bit different than some other complaints, let's say from some random prisoner. This is how the guards view it and how the courts view it. Oh, that's just some random person. Who cares, right? Who cares what they say? They're subhuman. They're just criminal scum. So we don't really care about, we're not going to take their complaint seriously. Now you've got a very reputable attorney who's got a lot of power behind her, who is now making these assertions to the court and putting her reputation and her bar license on the line, confirming these things. It has some heft to it. Okay. It contained legal material. A guard reviewed the contents of the notebooks. So the guard actually looked in it, read the pages containing confidential and privileged work product. So that's just outstanding. That's just great. Before permitting Maxwell to bring the notebook into the legal visit. So I was wrong. The guard actually said, oh, it is? Let me see. I'm going to read it. Oh, man. Contrary to previous legal conferences, somebody needs to smack those guards in the head and just tell them, hey, let her have what she wants, because they're going to that's a can opener. I'm a defense attorney. I'm like, oh, that's a beautiful can. Let me get my can opener right there. Just open it up. Ooh, that's going to be delicious. We're going to eat that up and enjoy it. Contrary to previous legal conferences, neither counsel nor Ms. Maxwell were permitted to have any water in the individual conference room during a 4-hour legal conference. Okay? You can't even drink. 3 to 6 guards watched Miss Maxwell and counsel for the entirety of the conference. So 3 to 6 guards, making sure. So now you're watching, now you're making arguments. Are they overhearing things? Are they reading your lips? What are they doing? Why do you need 6 guards watching a private meeting with your attorney? Neither counsel nor Miss Maxwell were permitted to use the most rudimentary of earbuds to listen to audio files on the laptop. So they had to turn the volume to be raised to maximum level. Miss Maxwell, she can't have privileged communications with her counsel and adequately prepare for trial if the prison guards can hear what she is reviewing and discussing with counsel. Hello. Due process problem. Prison guards ordered counsel to reposition her portfolio, which was being used to shield glare from the plexiglass divider separating counsel to permit her counsel to view a clear view of the laptop, because the portfolio was restricting the guard's view of counsel. Right, so she holds. There's a glare. They're shoving a laptop through a plexiglass or whatever, and she puts up. It sounds like a portfolio to block some of the lights. And no, you can't do that. So they want to see apparently what she can see. Oof. The prison guards then ordered counsel to reposition her portfolio, which was being used to shield glare. Already got that one. At one point, a prison guard interrogated counsel about what she was doing with her hands. Counsel was blotting a bleeding finger with notepaper. So that's it. At the conclusion of Sunday's legal visit, counsel requested the guards inventory Ms. Maxwell's documents in the presence of counsel to avoid the problem that ensued the last time when counsel was falsely accused of improperly leaving documents with Ms. Maxwell. Yesterday, the monitor, which had been used for video conferencing for months, was repositioned to a distance further away from Maxwell, impacting her ability to review the screen-shared documents with counsel. The request to fix that was denied. Today's video conferencing was reduced by 90 minutes, while changes were made to the equipment, so she's not getting the time. So, they come to these different agreements, right? What her attorney is negotiating with the courts is time. Okay, Bobby, how much time does Maxwell need? 24 hours a day. Well, we can't give you 24 hours a day, so how much? Well, at least 16. Well, we can't give you 16 either, so how about 12? Okay, we'll take 12. So she gets the 12, and they reduce it by 90 minutes. So then they go, you violated your own standards that you just set, Judge. It's due process violation. Now, which had these changes have disrupted the video conferencing. This had been working well. It's now severely impacting the attorney-client communication. Oh no, and it's severely impacting the ability to prepare the case for trial. On counsel's end, the audio is impacted by a whirling, whistling sound like water going down a drain. The video is completely blurred, causing eye strain, compromising the shared documents, which are too hazy to decipher. On the prison's end, the audio is loud and echoes, or on the sort of the other side of the plexiglass, the audio is loud, it echoes, it makes it difficult to understand. The monitor is enclosed with a box and a plastic cover. It's now positioned 3 to 4 feet away from Miss Maxwell. This distance impacts her ability to view. She has to contort her body, her back and neck are injured, risk further injury. Just all she wants to do, everybody, is just see those legal documents, man. She just wants to prepare her own defense. Poor Bobby Sternheim is just noting how impossible it is to do that. So we'll wrap this up. From Bobby Sternheim says, during a recent sentencing in which defense counsel described deplorable conditions, Judge McMahon acknowledged that the defendant had been subjected to conditions as disgusting and inhumane as anything I've ever heard about at any Colombian prison, but more so because we're supposed to be better than that. Okay, from a different case. Now we have Judge McMahon boldly stated there is no excuse for the condition in these two institutions. Detainees should not suffer for the incompetence of the U.S. Department of Justice and its subsidiary agency, the Bureau of Prisons. I will do what I can to bring your situation to people who will give who, if they give a damn, might do something. Okay, from a judge. A judge is acknowledging that. What a joke the Department of Justice is, right? Exhibit A. Bobby Sternheim is calling that out. Numerous complaints have been brought to everybody's attention. Little, if anything, has been done to improve Miss Maxwell's conditions. The government updates the court to embolden the MDC to maintain the status quo. The ever-changing rules are negatively impacting her ability to prepare for trial. They're interfering with her privileged attorney-client communication. The hyper-surveillance of Maxwell and counsel during legal visits is highly inappropriate and invasive at minimum. This should not be sanctioned by the court. Very truly yours, Bobby Sternheim. So, got that one fired out. Now, a lot of issues in there, right? Most things you might say to yourself, well, is that big of a deal? And individually, maybe not, right? Individually, if you have a sewer leak one particular day, you fix the toilet and it's resolved. But that's kind of not what's happening here, right? With Maxwell, it has been something that has been a repeat problem. And they're doing that sort of on purpose. Bobby Sternheim is just making a record. It's death by 1,000 cuts. Due process, due process, due process, due process. And then what they do is they just bundle those all up. And they say the same thing that the police say on a regular basis. The totality of the circumstances. Any one of those individually is not enough. But when you add them all together and you consider the totality of it in context, it's a due process violation, isn't it? Let me run through briefly what letter they were talking about. So this is what the government was saying. Firstly, probably should have started here, but we'll just run through this quickly. The government submits this letter to provide an update regarding the conditions. This was posted. So this was sent, it looks like, on June 7th, but then it was filed today. So the first time I saw it was on June 16th, but it sounds like this is what came out to Bobby Sternheim previously. So they're saying that that the defendant, she receives more time to review discovery than any other inmate. They say that she's permitted to review 13 hours per day, 7 days a week. During that time, she's got access to a computer. We already read this, actually. We've already covered this one, I think, the last time this came out. So I'm not going to do it again here, but it is, let's do a conclusion here, and then we'll see if there's any questions ready to go. But after any in-person visit the defendant receives, they conduct a body scan of the defendant, non-invasive machine scan. They check for any secret contraband. The defendant's cell is checked once per day for contraband. Finally, as discussed in the government's report, the staff conducts wellness checks every 15 minutes at night to confirm that she is breathing. She continues to be in view at all times, necessary for the safety of the institution and the defendant, including the other details. MD staff and psychology staff continue to monitor her daily. Then we have a redacted sentence, so it must be something about her medical condition. Staff continue to assess that she's physically healthy. Should the court have any questions, let us know. So, all right, so let's take a look at some questions over from our community at watchingthewatchers.locals.com, which is really the place to be. It's kind of the best place on the internet, and I want to invite you to go check that out. First up in the house is from Jeremy Metrita, says, I'm not sure which is worse, solitary confinement or never having privacy. Oh, good question. Yeah, probably never having privacy would be worst. Would be worse. I think I could do solitary. I don't want to do solitary confinement. Okay, Kamala Harris, relax out there. But it's, never having somebody just look at everything. It's so just degrading. Watching you go to the bathroom, watching you eat, watching you wipe, and everything. Ugh, humiliating, right? But we want to make sure she doesn't kill herself or be killed like Epstein was, however you want to interpret that little debacle. Now, let's take a look at our last question of the day from Dog Whistle. Says, How do we know the government wants to know what she is saying versus, say, Clinton and Epstein's friends? She can eat out. Rat out. Okay. How do we know the government wants to know what she is saying versus, say, Clinton and Epstein's friends? She can rat out. So, you know, it's a great question. It's kind of a complicated answer, but there are, you know, in criminal cases, there are possibilities for plea deals. Okay, right now, Ghislaine Maxwell sounds like she's not even remotely considering a plea deal, right? Or maybe the government is not even offering her one. But in most criminal cases, that's what happens. The defendant is charged with a crime. The government says, all right, look, we think that we can convict you on these three, but we're going to drop off the most serious charge if you agree to plead guilty to the lower charges. We think we can get you on the most serious one, but we're not positive. And because you've made some good points, we're going to let you sort of plead guilty to a lower charge. Now, there are some situations where that's worth it. If there is a significant benefit, right? I always tell people that you shouldn't be taking a plea deal if you could get the same thing if you went to trial and lost. What's the point of just sort of rolling over and pleading guilty rather than asking the court to find you guilty or asking the jury to find you guilty and exercising your presumption of innocence all the way up until the last moment? Some people, though, there are situations where you say, well, you know, the risks, the reward, the cost-benefit analysis don't really make sense, and so we're going to just take a plea deal because we have achieved some major benefit, right? Let's say, you know, if we go to trial, we might be looking at 5 years in prison. They're giving us 5 months in jail. We say, okay, well, you know, that's a good deal. We have a lot of exposure. If we lose a trial, this is a smoke and plea deal, so maybe we take it. And, you know, you might be able to see that work its way out in any criminal case. Now, Ghislaine Maxwell's case, I'm not sure I see that at all, right? She is fighting tooth and nail. Sometimes what we see is all of that clawing, all of that fighting sort of, you know, causes the prosecutor to offer some sort of a deal to say, all right, listen, we want you to serve 25 years. We're only going to ask for 15. Does that sound good? Take it or not. And so if Ghislaine Maxwell had something very, let's say, compelling that she might offer, then she could theoretically do what's called sort of a free talk, right? She's going to give them a bunch of information whereby she is outing, you know, Prince Andrew or whomever, somebody who is big that the government goes, whoa, we'll let you walk if you deliver the goods on all of those other people, right? It would have to be something major, something catastrophic. And I'm not sure that she has anything. I'm not sure what the government would be willing to do in that case, but it is an interesting conversation. You know, there are some situations where plea deals just don't happen, sometimes because it's just too politically volatile, right? Derek Chauvin, there were sort of murmurings that there was a plea deal, but I don't know how serious that ever was. And probably because everybody would have been very mad if he got a plea deal. They wanted their pound of flesh out of him. They want their pound of flesh out of defendants very frequently in high-profile cases, and so they're going to continue to get it. So, all right, so great questions from everybody at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. And a quick reminder that we also have a law firm over here. So I want to share some of these charges with you: drug charges, traffic tickets, felony charges, anything and everything in between. You can give us a call. Phone number 480-787-0394 for the law firm. Point your camera at this QR code and it will take you there. If you want to check out any of my other informational offerings, you can download the Law Enforcement Interaction Training program. Purchase this over at gumroad.com/Robert Gruler. And I would really appreciate a follow over here. So if you want to be up to speed, stay up to speed on some of the info products that I am working on, that is a good place to follow me. Thank you to everybody who asked some great questions today. You see yourself up there on the screen. Very much appreciate that. You keep the community lively and fun, and I appreciate it, over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. So if you go over there, a lot of other good stuff you can download. Free copy of my book, copy of my slides that we went through today, impeachment party document. You can download that. You can download a copy of my existence system template. We share links, and we meet with great people all throughout the day. We have another monthly locals meetup coming up on Saturday, June 26th, which is going to be about 10 days from now. My goodness, coming up soon. So I'm going to post the registration link over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com if you want to join in on that. And so lastly, of course, I am a criminal defense lawyer, as I mentioned previously, here at the R&R Law Group. We've got an awesome team of people here in Scottsdale. We offer free case evaluations. We really love the work that we do, helping good people find safety, clarity, and hope in their cases, and then hopefully their lives. And so if you happen to know anybody who needs help with a DUI, drug offense, anything like that, we would love the opportunity to see if we can lend a hand. Free case evaluations, All of our information is down in the description box below, along with some of the other channels if you want to stay connected, because we do put out a lot of other content. We've got a crypto channel down below if you're interested in blockchain and decentralization. That's really what I'm interested in that for. Less so about, making money or following Dogecoin or whatever. I'm very interested in the decentralized version of governance that we might be able to actually create that creates a parallel system on top of our current broken system, one that provides more freedom and more autonomy without being burdened by a overly bureaucratic government. So I'm very interested in that. Check some of that stuff out. And I've got an R&R Law Group Arizona channel if you're interested in Arizona law. A lot of good stuff to be connected on. Definitely check out watchingthewatchers.locals.com. And my friends, that is it from me today. I want to thank you so much for being a part of the show. We are going to be back here same time, same place tomorrow, 4 p.m. Arizona time, 5 p.m. Mountain, 6 p.m. Central, 7 p.m. on the East Coast. And for that one Florida man, everybody, have a tremendous evening. Eat a nice, hearty dinner and sleep well. I'll see you right back here tomorrow. Bye-bye.